Okay, it's a great crowd we have here today. We have a crowd from government, healthcare, and technology. It's good to have everyone on the line to join us for this exciting webinar. We're going to go through many topics. We're going to go through those topics quickly. You can see the agenda now on the screen. We're going to have different partners of OurCrowd joining us, as well as from the government. And we're going to be joined by 3 founders of exciting startups taking part of this COVID crisis situation. So I'm going to start very quickly with a brief overview of OurCrowd. I'm Lali, I'm a partner at OurCrowd. I lead business development. OurCrowd is the most active venture investor in Israel for 3 years or more in a row, headed by John Medved, is going to join us on the screen very soon. The way it works is very simple. It's a venture platform. We choose deals we want to invest in, and we invite the crowd to join us. The crowd is a diverse crowd. The crowd includes private investors, family offices, institutional investors. The deals are also very diverse. The majority is from Israel. We have altogether more than $1.4 billion committed, more than 200 direct investments, more than 19 different funds that we've invested in, 40,000 accredited investors that join us in this journey of investing in technology companies. This is a snapshot of our portfolio. It changes quickly, weekly. We're proud investors in the most exciting companies in Israel and outside of Israel. We also have a variety of funds that we invest in. We have digital health fund, Cure. We have funds that we join. We have funds that we create or co-create. And we use the funds to enable our investors to immediately diversify their investments. We are we're partners in 4 government-backed incubators in Israel. Ori, who heads our government relations, will go through that soon. The variety of the incubators that we have in Israel and one outside of Israel give us a very good visibility and exposure to early stage investments that are essential in the technology investment. We invest alongside the leading venture capital funds, the leading angel investors, and multinational companies, different CVCs that we either co-invest with or find different ways of collaborating with these corporates. We have distribution agreements with leading financial institutions globally. The most recent one with Stifel in the US. It's a collaboration we're extremely proud of. And finally, we have innovation services that we provide to leading corporations globally. We go through their needs assessment in this innovation journey, and we identify different knowledge blocks, engagement blocks, and community blocks to address the needs of the different corporates. And finally, the non-for-profit sector in Israel, we're a significant partner in that, and generally, Israeli startups support the non-for-profit sector in Israel. You can see the stats here. This is led by Tmura. Tmura here from Israel. We have in Israel more than 600 different startups donating to Tmura. It's part of the success-based options. Out of the successful exits that have contributed to Tmura, we can count many of OurCrowd's startups that we have been proud investors of. Altogether generated more than $15 million to these non-for-profit organizations. Some of it is very much relevant for this crisis situation. We have a lot of families with special needs, and this is very much supported by non-for-profit organizations in Israel that are funded by Tmura. So we are a very proud partner of Tmura. And this leads me to introduce you to Maurice Laster, Dr. Maurice Laster, the head of MedTech investments in OurCrowd. Maurice, now to you.
All right, thank you, Lali. My name is Maurice Laster. I'm the head of MedTech investments here at OurCrowd. I am a physician by training, serial entrepreneur by practice, and I've had the privilege of leading 28 medical technology investments here at OurCrowd. Next slide. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what's been going on in Israel. The status currently is close to 14,000 patients, 173 deaths so far, unfortunately. What I'd like for you to focus on is the graph on the lower right-hand corner. And what you're able to see is what everyone wants to see in this situation, which is a flattening of the curve. So you see it very nicely occurring as a result of the measures that the Israeli government has taken here over the past 2 months. Next slide. So on this slide, what we're seeing is the infections per day rate. And again, what you're seeing is this peak occurring at the beginning of the month and gradually going down. And hopefully that will be asymptotic to zero as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So our progressive travel ban and isolation began in February, pretty much right before our summit. Progressive quarantine began in March with a total lockdown occurring on the eve of our Passover holiday. And the measures resulted in the flattening of the curve, as we saw earlier, and the protection of the critical care ICU wards. So when we look at the disease basic reproduction rate, the R0, in other words, how many people an infected person infects. One of the big issues with this disease is that each infected person is infecting 3 to 4 people, whereas in regular influenza, you're infecting 1. The measures resulted in a basic reproduction rate of 0.6. Mortality rate is 1.3% compared to 7% worldwide. And the country was able to maintain 114 people on respirators with a capacity of 2,800, which was obviously the big issue in most countries, especially in Italy and New York. The full quarantine orders have been lifted this week, and we're starting to go back to 30% capacity. 1 million people are unemployed. Rules involve maintaining social distancing, masks in public places, temperature measurements before entering certain establishments, a limit of up to 500 meters from home for exercise. Supermarkets and pharmacies are always open, some stores to reopen, and we're going to have to see what happens as these measures occur over the next 2 weeks and see what the impact has been. Next slide, please. The amazing thing what's happened is in Israel, you've had a tremendous amount of companies taking their basic technologies and using them to fight the war on COVID. There are more than 70 companies so far that have been identified in the COVID space. We actually have seen in OurCrowd over 100 companies so far, and we're vetting them to see which ones we want to move forward with. The first one you'll hear about a little bit later. A new one will be MigVax. Next slide, please. And in Israel, what's been amazing is that the Israeli Ministry of Health actually approved 8 new drugs to treat COVID, looking at anti-HIV meds, immunological, convalescent plasma, clinical trials going with some positive data there, pluristem trials going on for ARDS, Camostat, an approved drug in Japan going on for treating COVID-19 directly, CBD potentially for treating ARDS. So there's been a tremendous amount of response from the Israeli Ministry of Health to approve drugs that exist and for entering new clinical trials to help treat this disease. Next slide. At this point in time, I am very proud to present the founder and CEO of OurCrowd, John Medved.
Thank you, Morris, and good evening to everybody. Next slide, please. And then move to the next one right thereafter. Thank you. Basically, the situation in Israel is like the rest of the world, but just a little bit better. Next slide. When you look at some of the ratings, there was one study in Forbes that mentioned that Israel is the safest place to be. I'm not sure that's true, but at least according to this group, they gave us very high points. The next slide shows you what data proves, and roughly we're doing very well on testing relative to the rest of the OECD. Out of the 36 countries, we're number 4 in terms of tests per million. Our mortality rate is also very any mortality is horrible, but we're relatively low. In terms of total deaths, we're high, and we're not so high, but too high. And in terms of total infections, cases are actually surprisingly high relative to the OECD. Next slide. And here's more proof of what Morris was talking about in terms of the flattening of the curve, and we want to see more of that. Next slide. Unfortunately, the corona plague has had a particularly disproportionate impact on Jewish communities worldwide. There are actually more Jews who have died in the UK that have died in all of Israel, despite the fact that they have 1/30 the population of Jews as Israel. And this is because Jews are highly social and because of the unique nature of Jewish life. And so we're very, very much cognizant that while in Israel things have been rather reasonable, some of our brethren around the world have really been hard hit. Next slide. This is not the first pandemic, and it's not going to unfortunately be the last. This slide shows you that we've seen a whole series of outbreaks. One of the issues has been that the investment community simply hasn't gotten ready and hasn't prioritized the need to get ready for the future pandemics. Next slide. And we feel that the opportunities for investment, the necessity to invest in technologies that will deal with this is critical because we are going to experience more of this going forward. Next slide. In particular, the need to innovate in a variety of areas has become really apparent. And we feel that at OurCrowd, we are well positioned, not only because we have a portfolio of 28 companies, many of them engaged already, but we have a global network of people who are not only investing money, but are willing to invest their efforts and their connections to help these companies make an impact. Next slide. Today, Israel is particularly well positioned to address these challenges. We are the startup nation, and you don't take my word for it. Listen to the World Economic Forum in terms of how they rank us in key criteria around the world. Next slide. There are many areas where companies right now are making news. And whether it's in testing technologies, next slide, run through them rather quickly, please. Or it's in therapeutics, companies like Pluristem with stem cells, or whether it's in ventilator technology, turning low cost into a reality, or as we'll hear later from our portfolio newest investment, MigVax, about the vaccine development. Israel is on the front lines of all of these areas: testing, therapeutics, vents, and vaccine. When we look at the variety of investments that are possible, they include not only prevention and treatment and healing, but also the new reality, how we are all going to work from home, how many of these trends, next slide please, which started before are now being accentuated and accelerated by current reality. Anyone who believes that we're going back to status quo ante, that we are going to live life the way it was always lived before, is wrong. The changes that have now happened to human culture and society, many of them are going to have far-reaching and long-lasting impact. We're very delighted, by the way, to be investing in a new vaccine company called MigVax you're going to hear from. It really, for us, is an extraordinary opportunity. Next slide. Today, we announced that we're leading a $12 million investment in MigVax, and this is going to help them get their vaccine to market in order to save lives. And this investment, as you will hear from the company, is quite differentiated in terms of many different aspects. Next slide. You're also going to hear from a company called Site Diagnostics, which is a world leader in blood testing. 2 drops and they will give you CBC. In particular, Site, next slide, has been being used in COVID quarantine situations at Israel's Sheba and elsewhere, and they'll describe that in today's webinar. Next slide. And finally, you'll hear from Pulm One, who is a company doing pulmonary lung testing, okay, which is going to be incredibly important going forward as a result of the potential lung damage that even those who have survived the virus and have come back. Next slide. Some of our other companies who are on the front lines who are not with us tonight include TytoCare, who are doing remote diagnosis and giving you clinical data. Next slide and keep them coming, please. Cryon, which is doing robotic process automation, allowing bots to write software. They just recently, if you go to the next slide, actually helped Maccabi, okay, hook up to the COVID data. Instead of taking 2 months for regular programmers, these little busy robots got it done in 48 hours. Next slide. MeMed is providing instantaneous detection of whether infection is bacterial or viral. And in particular, their AI-driven technology has the hope of actually doing earlier detection of COVID-19. Next slide. And the next slide. VocalZoom is doing a new array of sensors, and Sweech is doing, I'm sorry, go ahead and go to Sweech. And Sweech is doing disease management for COVID using the cell phone. And the next slide. And finally, even our American companies are getting into it. OurCrowd doesn't just invest in Israel, it invests around the world. And our company, Data World, is providing data aggregation and understanding for researchers everywhere. Next slide. Barcode Diagnostics is promising a potential 100 times improvement in the testing throughput of PCR. Next slide. And finally, TechC is allowing you to get virtual tech support without a technician coming into your home. Today, we're not having them service us. And they provide a video live chat, even being used for ventilators. Next slide, you can see. Together with companies like Vodafone and others, providing remote video assistance. And I think, finally, CyberMDX, which is stopping hackers who are now targeting all of our medical systems and devices, and who threaten to essentially take control of a ventilator or your pacemaker, send you a ransom note saying you've got 30 minutes or you're dead unless you pay the ransom. This has got to be stopped, and that's what companies like CyberMDX, who raised this money, have managed to do. I think with this slide, we're moving over to Ori Sobovich, who is the head of our government affairs, to take it from here. Ori? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, John, and thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you. So we're working very closely with several government ministries and entities that includes, first and foremost, the Israel Innovation Authority, the IIA. We're encouraging our portfolio companies to submit for 50% non-dilutive grants for their R&D projects. Each year, the IIA grants about $450 million of hundreds of startups, including some of our portfolio companies. We're working with the Ministry of Economy and Industry. We're working closely with the Foreign Trade Administration, including Ifat Alon-Perel, who will speak after me and is co-hosting the webinar with us tonight. We're also working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Israel Export Institute in order to assist our portfolio companies with entering new markets and introducing with key industry leaders. With the Industrial Cooperation Authority, we connect between our portfolio companies and foreign MNCs with offset obligation. In terms of incubators, OurCrowd is actually running 4 incubators in Israel and 1 in New Zealand. We leverage government funding through the PPP model, the private-public partnership model. The model is that in each startup that we accept into one of our incubators, whether it's in Israel or in New Zealand, each company that we accept actually gets between 75 to 85% funding from the government. We invest only 15%, and the money from the government is a non-dilutive grant, which makes it very beneficial for us. But although it might sound not intuitive, why would the government invest so much money? It actually creates a win-win-win situation. It's a win for startups and for entrepreneurs because, as we all know, it's very challenging to raise money in this seed stage, so it makes it easier for them. But also, it's not regular money, it's a smart money. We help the companies build and validate the business model, their marketing plans, so it's good for them. It's good for us, the investors and corporates who are running the incubators, because the great leverage we get from the government. But more than everything, it's a great leverage for the country, for the GDP, for the government, because there's a research made by the IAA. Every shekel that the government invests into these startups comes back between 5 to 8 times, because the tax income, because the exits, because they create more jobs. But even companies that fail and don't succeed eventually, because of the IPs, the lessons learned, the know-how, they create new startups. So it's very good for the economy, and we're very proud to be part of this program. Next slide, please. I think you skipped one. Can you go back? Thank you. So we are running 5 incubators, as I said before, and as Lali presented in the beginning. We have Labs 02 in Jerusalem. This is actually our first incubator, which is focusing on big data, AI, fintech, IoT, and more. Labs 08 in Beersheba, which is focusing on digital health and cybersecurity. We have both two incubators, Fresh Start in the north of Israel, and Sprout in New Zealand, which are focusing on ag tech and food tech. And last, we have the Kanegev incubator in Yerucham, which is focusing on medical cannabis. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as a close partner with the Israeli government in its support of the tech industry and venture capital, we have some insights into the steps that are being taken. So we actually advise the Ministry of the Israel Innovation Authority to build a new program, a new initiative with 50 million shekels that's supposed to bring some money from the government and some money from the VCs. Every company that fights, whether it could be directly or indirectly, in those companies that are fighting coronavirus, could get between 25 to 75% grant for their R&D from the government, and the VCs will complete the rest. Also in the US, we encourage our portfolio companies to apply for US non-dilutive funding, the paycheck. Some of the grants are relevant only for American companies. Most of them are relevant also for Israeli companies, or at least Israeli companies that have employees in the US. Next, please. So we know that there are on the line some people from the international financial institutions, such as the World Bank, IDB, ADB. We're very happy and would like to collaborate with you in terms of establishing new incubators in developing countries, and also in terms of connecting you to our portfolio companies that have some products that are very relevant for developing countries in order to fight the coronavirus. I'm honored to present our next speaker, Mrs. Ifat Alon-Perel, Head of the Economic and Trade Mission at the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C., and who is also our co-host for tonight's webinar.
Hi, everyone. As I won't be using slides, you may click the top right corner of your screen to swap shared screen with video. So thank you very much, Ori. As a civil servant, there is nothing better than talking after a successful private company that praises the government. But seriously, Israel's small size and special cultural characteristics really make the connection between the government, the public sector, and the private sector, as well as the academia, pretty straightforward and natural. The health sector is a great example of that, where not only in times of crisis like the definitely situation that we are at now, but also regularly you can find around the table convening pretty easily both Ministry of Health, hospitals, the HMOs, Innovation Authority that Ori just mentioned, digital health companies, big pharmaceuticals, etc. Due Israel's legal framework in the health sphere, where all citizens are assigned to one of those 4 HMOs, there are a few decades of health records of all Israelis. Everything is digital before, I believe, the term digital health was introduced. When you combine this with a variety of ethnicities of all Israelis, you get great resource of big data that is especially attractive for health research and development of artificial intelligence-based solutions. So to partner with Israeli companies is really to enjoy the fruits of those incentives to innovation that Ori mentioned some of them, this proximity between the different players in the health sectors, and this special health big data. I invite those of you on the audience from the US to explore one of the unique opportunities to partner with Israeli companies in development of innovative products, which is the BIRD Foundation. BIRD Foundation is the 40 years old bilateral R&D fund that provides up to $1 million per project developed by Israeli and American companies. You may visit the birdf.com website or contact us for more information about that. Lastly, I'm very happy to share with you today that the US Chamber of Commerce has set up a new working group to advance the partnership between the United States and Israel in the health sector. And though it was planned before anyway, the Chamber has accelerated and launched it now in response of the COVID-19 crisis, understanding that together we are stronger. The goal is to convene together leaders from American and Israeli businesses, government, research institutions, etc., to both build new partnerships and projects linking companies with government funding, working with the state agencies, but also to advocate for public policies to enhance bilateral cooperation and innovation through solving policy and regulatory issues that sometimes might restrain the growth of this sector. The topics will be digital health, bioconvergence, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, etc. Both governments are engaged on these initiatives, and those who would like to get personally involved may contact the Chamber of Commerce or our embassy, of course. Speaking of our office, just to mention that the Israeli Ministry of Economy operates 44 offices around the globe. 4 of them are here in the United States. Each of us leading these offices, these missions, is there to further assist you in connecting better with the Israeli ecosystem, of which you're getting a glimpse today. And in the DC office, we give a special focus on policy and regulatory issues. And we're also the liaison office to the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, also mentioned by Ori. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and thank you very much to OurCrowd, the Israeli innovators, and all of you in the audience.
Thank you, Ifat. And it's now my pleasure to move to the what I call the most exciting part, and I don't mean that as a dig to anybody who spoke before, including myself, but the real stars of the show are the innovators and the companies that are on the front line. And to get us kicked off, we're going to be hearing from my old friend, Michael Berman. Believe it or not, we actually knew each other when we were college students. Mike was at Cornell, and we were doing neat things for Israel. We've stayed in touch. Mike has gone on to have a very distinguished career as a leader in the healthcare arena, and he's now board member of our company doing lung function testing, Home One. Mike Berman.
Thank you very much, John. It's good to see you again. We both look a little different than we did back in 1978. Here you see a picture of the Pulm One mini box, which is a device that was designed and developed and approved by the FDA and now is a commercial device in the United States for doing complete pulmonary function testing. Pulmonary function testing is when you go to a pulmonologist or an allergist and they measure the amount of air that flows out of your lungs, the volume of your lungs, and the diffusion of gases across the lung membrane. If you go to the next slide, please. This is what it looks like when being used by a patient, and this probably doesn't look all that remarkable to you. Looks like something that you would expect, but if you go to the next slide, you'll see what this looks like compared to the competition. The competition is body plethysmography. 90% of the pulmonary function tests done in the world are what you see in the body plethysmography column there, where you see a patient inside of a telephone booth a size device, and the patient does about 20 minutes of breathing maneuvers in order to have the complete pulmonary function test done. There are some other niche devices that can do the same thing using helium and nitrogen, but the body box is the gold standard today. And the mini box essentially is better, faster, cheaper in just about every category. It's smaller, it's quicker to use, it's more portable, it's just as accurate. The test duration is quicker. As we have now realized, also a very important additional advantage in the world of COVID is that disinfection control is much better. Imagine if you've got 10 patients that are getting pulmonary function tests And imagine if you are trying to clean out the inside of that body box in order to prevent getting cross-patient contamination. It's much easier to actually clean the mini box exterior than the body box interior. As you can see on this slide, there are a lot of patients in the world that have pulmonary problems. We expect those numbers, unfortunately, to go up significantly as a result of COVID running through the population. We would expect many, probably tens of millions of patients a couple of years from now to have lung damage as a result of COVID, and the proper assessment of these patients will most likely involve a proper pulmonary function test. If you go on to the next slide, you can see here that this is the current protocol from the American Thoracic Society and the European Respiratory Society of how you do a proper full pulmonary function test. I won't go through all the details here, but suffice it to say that our mini box is as accurate as the body box system. Next slide. We have basically a game changer in this field. We're now selling in the United States. We've got about 300 customers. There's about 15,000 potential customers out there that we are reaching out to in order to sell the system. If you go to the next slide. Here are the results of the clinical trials that we've done. I won't go through all these, but we've tested this in hundreds of patients, and we see accuracy that is very accurate when compared to the body box gold standard. Next slide. Lots of physician testimonials. They love it. If you go on to the next slide. Interestingly, the first market that we have gone after is the replacement market. There are 15,000 body boxes out there, but there are also quite a number of physicians and physician offices that only do spirometry. They don't do full pulmonary function testing. And 2/3 of the revenue that we've had thus far have been into this new market, this expanded market, where physicians are using our device. Instead of sending the patient to the body box, they're bringing the full pulmonary function test to the patient in the office. And we actually expect that that will be positively impacted by COVID as well, where physicians and patients are going to be reluctant to send their patients to hospitals to get tested, and instead would choose to have the pulmonary function testing done in their offices. Next slide. You can see our revenue growth and our projected revenue for 2020. And if you move on to the next slide, that's the summary. Unfortunately, in the post-COVID world, we expect that there will be quite a number of patients who need to have full pulmonary function testing, and we intend to be there to help out with the management of these patients. Thank you all very much for your interest.
Thank you, Mike, for that presentation. And I want to mention something before we move on to the next presentation. And that is that not only do you get a chance on OurCrowd to invest in these companies, we're an investment platform. You have to be an accredited investor, and the minimum amounts of investment are $10,000 per company. But you also can get involved with the company. These companies are looking for clinicians who want to do tests on them. They're looking for distributors who think this is a great product for their country. And I can't tell you how many hundreds, and I think actually at this point it's already thousands of connections we've made for our companies through the OurCrowd platform. You can go to our platform, you can click on the introductions feature and take a part in this, but we want you to be involved in terms of helping us not just to fund these companies, but to help them move forward. For our next presentation, we have Daniel Levner, who's a co-founder of a remarkable company called Sight Diagnostics. Sight set out to make a dream which others had talked about actually come true. How could you take 2 drops of blood from a single pinprick and essentially turn it into a clinically valid complete blood count? Some people didn't believe it was possible. Sight has done it. I've tried it myself, and now the FDA has cleared it. So Daniel, take us away.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. As John mentioned, my name is Daniel Levner. I'm one of the co-founders of Sight Diagnostics. The next slide, please. Sight is an Israeli company founded in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv around 2011. Frankly, our story starts as a technology story. We're really excited about the advances in AI, and we said, surely these advances have a role to play in medicine, specifically in diagnostic medicine. But as the years progressed, we actually got really excited about the purpose, the mission of our technology, which is to provide fast, accurate, and low pain testing. And specifically what that means is that today, very often diagnostic testing takes several days to get your results. I know that's my experience in my daily medical, not daily, hopefully, in my medical use. And what we've been able to do is actually to turn some tests into tests that give you results in minutes instead of days. We actually started with a test for malaria. That's the instrument, that's still actually the previous slide. We started with a test for malaria that we launched in 2014. And we've been able to get this test, this instrument, into 25 different countries worldwide. We sold more than 1 million tests for the system. It was a great technological success and addressed a really important medical need. But we're also interested in a need that affects even a broader community, which is why in 2018, we launched our second instrument you're seeing on the right. It's called OLO, and it provides a very specific blood test that I'll tell you about in a minute called the complete blood count. And as John mentioned, this test has actually recently been approved by the FDA through a 510(k) clearance. Next slide, please. So what is a complete blood count? I'm sure you've all seen it. We've all had it done at least once in our life. It's a test that measures many different parameters, at least 19 to 21 different parameters in blood, including the counts of different types of cells, including red blood cells, several types of white blood cells, platelets, and so on. Now, it's only specific for certain diseases in terms of what it's able to diagnose, but it is a first line of questioning for doctors very often. It's a first question to determine things like infection, bacterial versus viral, cancers. It is diagnostic for anemia, and so on. So it's a very broad test. There's 4 billion of them conducted yearly in the world and 450 in the US alone. Next slide, please. Now, you may ask, okay, how does this relate to COVID-19? Well, our system, CBC, doesn't in itself diagnose a COVID-19 infection, but what you're seeing in the diagram on the slide is that the test is actually being used to triage patients who come in with COVID-19. And what that means is really to assess the severity of the disease, to determine whether a patient needs to be hospitalized, for example, whether they need to enter the ICU, and so on. So it's not the test that you've been hearing about in the news that is in such high demand, but it's actually the next level of testing that assesses what to do with a particular patient once they've been shown positive. Now, on this slide, you're seeing a comparison between conventional equipment and our new solution, right? So currently, you can get a complete blood count done, but usually that involves sending the blood to a central laboratory. The central laboratory has this large piece of equipment, hundreds of thousands of dollars for sure, that really only makes sense to put in these large hospitals or large laboratories. And even versions of that large equipment that have been miniaturized, other people try to miniaturize it, they always have drawbacks, including requiring cleaning and calibration and so on. Our system, again, you're seeing on the right, is designed around these single-use cartridges. It doesn't really require any calibration or cleaning. And as John mentioned, we're the first to be able to do this kind of testing from small finger prick samples. So literally 2 drops of blood are enough for us to get the same result, actually with the same accuracy as you get from that traditional large equipment. Next slide, please. So this brings me to why you would want to use this for COVID-19 specifically. And one example is actually in practice right now at Sheba Tel Somer Hospital. We placed one of our instruments in their isolation units. The isolation units are those units where they're airtight, they let in the COVID patients, but they really control what goes in and out. Prior to our technology, they had to take the blood tubes out and bring them back to the central lab equipment. And of course, that requires cleaning and a lot of care to make sure that these blood samples don't carry the infection out of the isolation area and infect other individuals along the way. Our instrument is small enough that you can just put it within the isolation unit. All the testing can be done right there on the spot without moving any blood samples. Next slide, please. Now, there's another use that's actually emerged, which is maybe a little less obvious. This is a collaboration we have with Ichilov Hospital in Tel Aviv, and originally set forward with the help of the IDF. And the idea here actually isn't to target the COVID-19 patients themselves, but actually the collateral damage, which is the individuals who should have been going to the hospital for all sorts of other testing. In this case, cancer patients, chemotherapy patients, who because of the quarantine and because the hospitals are overrun, aren't able to go into the hospital for the regular testing. So the idea is to bring the testing to the patient's home. And what we're doing in this collaboration is actually taking our OLA instrument and installing it within a mobile diagnostic units, mobile vans that will be able to service within Israel this chemotherapy population. Next slide, please. Now, last but not least, a really important question now in the treatment of COVID-19 is the assessment of who's high risk and who isn't, because we keep hearing about patients who are asymptomatic or actually have a minor disease versus ones at the opposite end of the spectrum who are in the ICU and are a serious risk. We don't have an answer here yet, but one of the interesting things about our technology is that we call it digitized blood. We can take a blood sample and turn it into a large collection of digital images that represent that that blood sample, and we can run various research studies on that. So we can actually look for indicators within that sample that may indicate the prognosis of the disease. Again, this is R&D, but we're seeing some interesting results. Last slide, please. All right, well, this I'll hand it on back to John. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate that. And now for the star, perhaps, of today's show, which is our newest investment. It's a company called MigVax. We're joined by David Zigdon, who is the CEO, and Professor Itamar Shalit, who is a member of the Scientific Advisory Board and a specialist in infectious diseases. MigVax is leading the charge, certainly here in Israel, and we think globally to a certain extent, in helping us find a path to a successful vaccine. It turns out that this company has been working on a similar project for years before the COVID-19 crisis. As soon as they heard of the crisis breaking, they began to adapt their research to this crisis, and we have made a decision and announced it literally today to lead a $12 million investment round in MigVax. We're delighted to have David Zigdon, the CEO. Please, David.
Thank you, John. I'm the CEO of Migal. Migal is the multidisciplinary research institute located in Upper Galilee. As John said, in the past 4 years, we have been working on vaccine for coronavirus in avian. We have designed a system that can adapt itself very fast when mutation of the virus show up. Now, when we are facing COVID-19 in human, we have the opportunity to use the same methods that we develop for human, the same method to develop a human vaccine. Now I have Professor Itamar Shalit with me. He explain what we are doing. Itamar?
Good evening and nice to be here. We heard a lot this evening about the coronavirus pandemic and its horrendous impact on health, on economy, on our social life. What's very important is to understand that to suppress it and to go back to our normal life, we have to invest in a vaccine that will be effective. Once we have an effective vaccine that could be dispersed all over the world, then would be the time that we can go out of this pandemic situation and go back to normal life. Now, the virus itself, you can see it in the picture. You see the red spikes. These are the S protein. These are the spikes of the virus, and they recognize receptors on the cells in different areas in the body and cause the disease. Inside the virus, there are other proteins. Some of them are named N proteins. They are important also in eliciting immune response. Next, please. We have identified over the last 4 years, and actually even more than that, that there is a problem with a chicken coronavirus disease called infectious bronchitis virus. It's a coronavirus very similar to the human COVID, but it mutates very rapidly, very often, more than does influenza virus. And the vaccines that we had at that point were ineffective against the newest mutations. So our scientists decided to have a platform approach to create a vaccine that not only will take care of the newer mutation, but whenever a mutation arises, it can be easily adapted and rapidly adapted to the newer mutation. And we have now a human vaccine sketch of the proteins, and you can see the red, the yellow, the gray. These are the S and 2Ns antigens of the virus, and you see that they are linked to a carrier protein, and this carrier protein is extremely important simply because it enhances the immune response against each of these proteins. And what happens is that based on the IBV vaccine, we are now creating a human homologue of that that is very, very likely to work similarly to the IBV vaccine, which the results of it I'll show in a second. But we are moving ahead in activating the three arms of the immune system. The mucosal arm, which takes care of our respiratory system, our guts, etc., the antibodies in our blood, and also the cellular immunity, which means lymphocytes that can kill cells that harbor the virus. Next slide. Now, this is a key experiment that was done in the Israeli Veterinary Institute. We have looked at the efficacy of the chicken vaccines in chicken, that we gave them the vaccine, and then we challenged them with a massive inoculum of IBV virus, which was live and virulent, and looked at the level of harboring of virus after they got the vaccine. And those who did not get the vaccine showed 100% shedding of virus from the respiratory tract and from the gut. What was most alarming is that when we used the commercial avian vaccine that we used at that time, we did not see any reduction in the amount of virus that was shed from the respiratory tract and the gut. But if you look at the right-hand side of the graph, you can see that with our MIGVAX, after 3 days, we already saw about 15–20% reduction in harboring of the virus. But within 6 days, 80% of the chicks did not harbor any virus. And those who did had a very, very, very low number of viruses. Remember, they got massive inoculum, much higher than what occurs in real life situation. Next, please. Now, people think, hey, the winner takes it all. The one who gets first to the market is going to win it all. No, not at all. The GSK CEO said that we'll need more than one vaccine, and I can attest to you that we're going to be much more than one. The needed amount and the fact that we are going to need it not only to the Western world, but to Southeast Asia, to third world, etc., we will need definitely different kind of vaccines. Next, please. Now, if we look at the competitive landscape, and you can also skip to the next one already, the idea behind every single technology to create vaccine is some way or another to present mainly the S protein, the outside protein, to our immune system. You can do it with a killed virus. You could do it with proteins alone. You could do it with adenovirus that present it. You can do it with RNA that encodes the S protein in our body. Whatever the case is, our immune system sees this antigen and produces antibodies against it. The thing is that it is not clear at all that having antibodies only against the S protein is enough. It might not be enough, and there is also some problems with having only antibodies that may enhance the disease, which is beyond the scope of this discussion. The timeline of the project is the synthesis of the human oral subunit vaccine, the 3 proteins linked to the carriers. These are ongoing as we speak. Again, with all the human structure of the human COVID virus. we are going to start doing safety and efficacy in rodents, in this case, mice, and later on in rats, in May 2020. And the phase 1/2 clinical trial will start hopefully on summer 2020, because we are going to have all the data from the animal studies, and that will be sufficient to create this kind of protocols to the first in human. And with the first in human, within 6 months, we definitely will have data that will help us understand both the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine. And then we will try now to go to the regulatory authorities, and following this kind of first in human studies, design the phase 2B studies, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the market, what's the market? The market is 1 billion of those that will be required worldwide in order to adequately address the coronavirus epidemics. We'll need multiple sources in vaccine, and manufacturing will be necessary in many, many, many places. We will not be able to support the need of the whole world. And we know that the vaccine price range from $9.5 to $200. This is the estimation of the American CDC. And cost of goods is estimated as low single-digit USD, and that's our vaccine. And move to the next slide, please. So to summarize, we have an orally based vaccine. We are giving it by mouth. We are not injecting it. It's safe. It's simple. It's less costly. So we can give it without having a nurse in place to give any injection, for example, in the mouth. It is based in preventing infection. Most companies moving ahead did not have this data before designing the vaccine or starting phase 1. We already have this proof of concept of efficacy. And we activate the 3 distinct immunological pathway, which is possibly the best way to try and have an efficacious vaccine against this virus. Safety is clear because it cannot cause a disease. It's not a virus. It's not a live virus. It's not an attenuated virus. Sorry, go back, please. There are less chances of side effect. And from a market size, we have an advantage in large-scale manufacturing with low cost. It's produced in an E. coli bacteria, very simple, in a fermenter, very simple. We can create huge amount of doses with relatively intermediate and large-size fermenters. And I think that that cost effectiveness is something that will make us very competitive in the market. And of course, we can adapt to variant viruses, because that was the original reason why we started to have this vaccine, because we had to address variation in the coronaviruses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Itamar. And now we're at the question and answer period. You're invited to send your questions over the answer box or the question box, and I'll do my best to direct them to the appropriate people. There's a question here of what is the reason of the success of Israel's COVID struggle. First of all, we're still not out of the woods yet. And I'll turn that over to Morris if you're still with us. But just before he gets on, I think the big answer is that Israel has a lot of experience with emergencies. We've fought wars, we've had serious crises. Our people are good at handling sort of improvisation. And I think that our government here actually acted a little bit earlier. Morris, any other comments on that question?
I think that the government actually was proactive in this crisis, saw what was coming and dealt with it in an appropriate manner. I think we're also looking at a demographic issue. If we look at Italy, where the average age is something on the order of 60, our median age is about 30. And as we all know, the increased age of the population correlates directly with the mortality rates of the COVID virus. I think that as a whole, we're actually healthier. We have the Kovetz or the sick funds that basically do a tremendous job of preventive medical care. And that is also something that is more available here than in other countries. And I think that has helped create the situation. So for example, if you look at the United States, approximately 45% of the population suffers from a chronic ailment, from a chronic disease. And again, increasing the mortality issue as related to the virus. So in addition to what John said, I think that the demographics and the health of the population definitely play a role here as well.
Thank you, Morris. There's a question about someone who suggested that a recent article said that the lockdown in Israel has not slowed down the virus. What's our view on this? I would say that there are a lot of, look, we're a democratic society, lots of articles, lots of opinions. The virus seems to have slowed down. We don't know if it will recover as we release people out of the lockdown, but so far, unless Morris wants to take a different opinion, I think that we do believe that the virus has slowed down, but we're certainly not out of the woods yet. We were asked a question about what the situation is in the West Bank. We're sort of connected to the West Bank. They don't have the medical infrastructure that we have in Israel. Their infection is not that high yet, but they're also not doing that much testing, and Israel is providing a lot of assistance there. We're asked the question about what the role of Magen David, the Israeli Red Cross, has been during this outbreak, and the answer is they were very, very involved from the beginning, in particular taking tests at home before we had drive-throughs or even now kiosk tests, and Israel's testing is really making fast strides. We're up north of 12,000 tests, which would be the equivalent in US terms of almost 400,000, which is not yet reached. But Magen David was doing that and has been bringing patients to the hospitals. One question we got from Brazil was how many of the Israeli population has been tested so far. It's now over 250,000 have been tested, which is almost 3% of the total population. We've been asked if the PowerPoint presentation will be available, and the answer is yes. We will make this presentation available on our OurCrowd website, and we will also send everybody who registered here a link to get that presentation. Please feel free to distribute it. We're being asked a question by Mr. Moskowitz about the cost of the device, and I'm assuming that this was a question about the either the mini box or about Olo, I think I would let each of these companies answer specifically about their costs and what their pricing models are. Are they software components? Do they have to pay? What is the list price? Start with Mike from Poem 1. What's the cost of the mini box? And then we'll hear from Site Diagnostics about their cost.
In the U.S., we sell the mini box for a little over $30,000 per device, and we charge $3 per usage with a filter that is a consumable filter, disposable filter for each patient. In markets outside the U.S., it's a little less than that, and we're starting to experiment with a business model now that would have a lower cost lower price for the hardware and a higher price for the disposable.
Can we hear from Daniel about the cost of Olo, please?
Yeah, I think it's best actually that Ben reach out to the organizers to connect with us directly. But as far as models, you're right on the money that there's people who prefer to buy the instrument outright and then buy our one-time consumables, or people who buy the what they call reagent rental, where they only buy consumables and the cost of the instrument is amortized within that. There is also a really interesting aspect here about the data itself. I think that was part of the question as well, because by getting these digital images of blood, we're actually building a database of what blood looks like and what diseases may be hiding in it and how one can diagnose them.
Okay, we've got a question. Is the Israeli government planning to reduce the quarantine, go back to normal work life? The answer is yes, and they already started a couple of days ago. We still have a long way to go. Is the chicken vaccine in commercial use? My understanding, Itamar, is not yet, because you were just about ready to release it when COVID hit. Is that correct? Itamar, I think we lost Itamar. We'll move on. Another question about the slides. We're going to send them to you. If there's not a return of the virus this fall or next winter, will a vaccine be needed? Morris, you want to handle that?
So basically, we don't know what's going to go on with this disease. We're really neophytes at it. We don't know how it's going to behave. Based on the data, this is going to be with us for a long time. We don't know if it's going to mutate. We don't know what the effects are going to be. So I think that the need for the vaccine will definitely be there as we move forward.
Okay, we're being asked about our experiences with virtual care and telehealth. What progress have we made in contact tracing? We'll put you in touch, by the way, Satish, who's asked that question, with our company, Tyto, who has made strides in terms of virtual care and telehealth, and I'm sure would love to talk to you. And in terms of contact tracing, we have another company called Nura, who are doing great work, and we'll put you in touch with them. There's a lot of discussion about COVID virus mutation. How does MIGVAX address this evolving challenge? Itamar, can you talk about the dangers and the potential of COVID virus mutation and how MIGVAX is going to handle that?
The study that showed that in the last month, the rate of mutation of viruses like measles or influenza or dengue are 0.0 some per year. The rate of mutation of the COVID-19 are already 39 mutations per year. Some of the mutations are not very important, but some of them may be very important in terms of vaccine. This is how we started with the chicken vaccine, as I mentioned. There were mutations that made a vaccine ineffective, so we created an effective vaccine, which is readily available to manipulation, the genetic type of manipulations, to create the novel variant coronavirus vaccine. And it will happen in a short period of time and very, very cheaply.
Okay, another question for you, Itamar. The need for volume in vaccines is obvious, but why are different types of vaccines needed?
Well, in general, there is no specific need per se for different kind of vaccine, but different kind of companies address the vaccination issue with their own technology that was successful with other viruses. And since we are in a rush to get a vaccine, each one of them goes ahead and tries to use their vaccine technology to see if it will be active and effective. And at the end, we will have several vaccines that will be effective, and the market will tell who is going to survive better than others and who is going to be better in terms of effectiveness.
We're being asked the question about how MIGVAX is aligning with people like the NHS in the UK or the CDC for usage. Itamar, can you describe, are you guys in early days of reaching out to these people, or where are we in terms of our interaction with these institutions?
We are at this point in early with NIAID, the NIH, and also with the Paul Institute in Germany. So these are institutions that can help us in design our clinical studies, and they have all kind of availabilities to help us and giving us all the kind of very useful advice. So these are the key institutions that we're now in contact with.
Yes,
we're not at the point of the usage. We are not at the point of the usage with any other countries now.
Right. I want to reach out to the crowd and say we would be delighted of anybody who's either here from the embassies or from the governments or individual investors who have ties to these organizations. Please bring them to us, and we will be happy to put them in touch with MIGVAX and make sure that when the time is right, the alignment takes place. We have a question about how many elderly Israelis in nursing homes have a DNR. I don't know if we know that answer. Morris, do you have a clue on that one?
No, not at all. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. That's one we can't answer. How much collaboration is going on? I think we just answered that about whether we're discussing with Imperial College or Oxford. We're interested in these collaborations, but it's still very early days. We will share the presentation. What will be required of tourists to visit Israel? Where they have to show the results of an antibody test. Anybody's guess here. My guess is it's going to be a while until Israel's opened up for tourists, and we're looking into that because we have a lot of business people who want to come here and get deals done, and we'd love to have it. Are there any companies in Israel that are creating masks for children and adults? And the answer is yes, there's several of them, and we are looking at investing, and we are aware of them, and we'll be happy to give you information. We're being asked about questions. What are the ways to invest via OurCrowd? Is there one investment in a general fund, different funds, etc.? Great question. Thank you, Andy. The answer here is very simple. You in OurCrowd can choose to either invest in a single company like MigVax or like Site Diagnostics or like Home One. You choose that company. You invest in a single company fund, which we manage. Minimum investment is $10,000. You can also invest in general funds. And the funds either have a specific purpose, like our digital health fund called Cure. We'll be launching soon a very interesting pandemic fund, which you should stay tuned for. And we have a general index portfolio fund that includes 50 of our companies, such as all of the ones that you've seen here today. And that's called OurCrowd 50. Our fund investments with multiple companies have a minimum investment of $50,000. All the information about how to invest or these companies is available at ourcrowd.com. It's a very, very intuitive and easy to use website. Urge you to do that. And if you just reach out or reach out even to me directly on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, we'll find a way to hook you up with our members of our investor relations team. We had today over 1,000 people sign up for this webinar. We are absolutely blown away by the response, and we'd like to be in touch with most of you. There's a question here about the time frame for MigVax. We're deliberately being vague about it because it's work in progress, but we hope that they'll be in humans in a matter of months, and the animal studies are beginning in a matter of weeks. Do we think that home tests will be available or legal in Israel soon? Sure hope so. Do we believe that they will be? Not sure. Okay. Why is MigVax not getting into clinical trials earlier like Moderna? Because they were working already in the genre. But remember, they had developed the vaccine for the chickens, and they had to modify it for the human COVID. And I think they're getting into trials pretty darn fast. Itamar, any comment on that?
I agree. It's very fast.
Yeah, and we're looking to collaborate with other researchers worldwide. We definitely believe in open research. Someone like the mini box. How long does it take for the vaccine to be effective from its initial point? Itamar?
Well, we have to give at least 2 initial doses and then a boost dose. And after the 3rd dose, we believe it will hold for a month. We still don't know how many months. And that's part of the thing that we're going to test in the 2nd phase of the clinical trials. And if we need, we can give another boost. Many vaccines are giving like 0, 1 month, 6 months, and then 1 year, and then sometimes after additional years. So these kind of things are studied as we go along, and it will take some time before we know the exact answer.
Okay, we're being asked to help make connections to ministries of health in countries like Brazil and others, and the answer is we are absolutely willing to be your partner on that. Your address is Ori Sobovich and our government affairs group, and we will be contacting you, Benny. What are the risks of the ability to raise dollars with this coming financial crisis in the world? And the answer is the risks are significant, but what we're finding is that companies like the ones you saw here who have really a play in this game, they are getting investor interest and they're raising money. Frankly, since announcing this investment in MigVax yesterday, we have another webinar with the company tomorrow for our investors. We have never seen so much response and so fast investment interest as this one deal. On the other hand, companies that don't have a direct relevance to the current crisis, some of them are going to have trouble raising money. And we're trying to educate our investors that very often some of these companies will bring their valuations or prices down, and great companies are built in these crises, and often it becomes a very good vintage for investment. When Site DX will be available in Europe, it's already available in Europe, and we're happy to put you in touch with them now. The final couple of questions, then we'll let you go. is, what is the opinion of COVID on the whole startup markets worldwide? It's a huge impact. When markets go down worldwide, so do startups. Startups are going to be starved for money. There was a study just released that suggested that as many as 4 out of 10 startups might go out of business because of lack of money. I can't comment on whether that's a correct number or not, but certainly many will. And we're working very hard at OurCrowd to make sure that our startups cut their costs, extend their runways, make sure that they stay close to their customers, and that we raise money effectively. We are being asked whether we think the new government in Israel will influence COVID-19. Since most of that activity will be under the control still of the prior personnel, the Minister of Health is staying the same. We don't think there's going to be much impact. It'll be good to have a government for a change. And I'm for one, on a personal level, positive about this. Can Ola do antibody testing? Daniel, I don't think so. Can Ola do any antibody testing? I don't think that's set up for it yet.
Not today, but it is a platform, and we're going to be extending the tests available with time.
Okay, stay tuned for that. What is Israel's daily testing capacity? As of today, I think it was 12,000. We are being told that it's going to get to 20 or 30,000, God willing, speedily in our days. And I think with that, we have other questions. We're going to try our best to answer them to you directly, but we're going to have to cut it now because they keep on stacking up and we have tons of questions here. We will answer all of them, and we urge you to stay in touch with us. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you all for participating, the hundreds and hundreds of you from all around the world. We love you, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you again on an OurCrowd webinar. Thank you for now.